And right now, our first session, we'd like to thank Northrop Grumman for sponsoring all of our sessions today. Thank you, Northrop Grumman. Where are you? You're here. I know. I saw you earlier. Phil McAlister, who was going to be our moderator, has to go off to a flight readiness review today. So our moderator is Misty Snubkowski. Close enough? Okay, good. She's the Commercial Low Earth Orbit Development Program Executive in the Commercial Spaceflight Division for NASA Exploration and Operations. Misty, thank you.
So this is working? The pointer was working, you said?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Well, not fine. When I figured out how to do it.
All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us so early in the morning. So like he said, I am subbing today for Phil McAlister. My name is Misty Snubkowski. Phil is down at JSC. He's attending the flight readiness review for the first private astronaut mission to the space station with Axiom. So I'm sure Tej will mention that later today. So we have 75 minutes today, and the plan is I've got just a couple slides here to kind of talk about this vision of the LEO economy, our roadmap that will kind of give you a timeline of our strategy for implementing these commercial LEO destinations after the ISS retires in 2030. And then I've got a one-pager that kind of shows our portfolio that for our commercial LEO destinations. And then I'll pass it over to the guys who will talk about their companies and their individual platforms. And then that should give us about 20-30 minutes at the end for some Q&A. And hopefully everybody's a little more awake by then and we get some good discussion and dialogue going. So I just want to take a minute and introduce our panel. So first off, we've got Tejpaul Bhatia. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at Axiom Space. He joined Axiom from Google and has extensive leadership experience with high growth startups, and he studied computer science at Columbia. Next is Marshall Smith. He's the Senior Vice President for Space Systems at Nanoracks. He oversees the development of Nanoracks' customer-focused commercial space stations, outpost platforms, and additional supporting systems. And he joined Nanoracks after a long and distinguished career at NASA. Next, we have Rick Mastracchio. He is the Director of Strategy and Business Development for Northrop Grumman's Human Exploration and Operations Unit. And prior to joining Northrop, he spent 20 years as a NASA astronaut. And then last but not least, we have Steve Lindsey. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Sierra Space. He's a former US Air Force pilot and NASA astronaut with more than 30 years of flight test experience. So we've got a really great panel for you guys today. Really looking forward to the discussion. So what is this LEO economy that people keep talking about? There's a whole vision, and what I want you to take away from this slide is there's a lot of pieces to this vision, but it is a whole new world of possibilities. If you take a look at the top right of the slide there, you see references to the very successful commercial cargo and commercial crew programs. And so now that we have those capabilities in place, we have a way to transport cargo and crew through commercial operators. The next piece of that vision that we want to try to enable are commercial LEO destinations. And so that's what these guys are going to talk to you today during this panel. And we want these destinations to be commercially owned, commercially operated, and obviously we want them to be safe, reliable, and cost effective. And another big part of this vision is, you know, the International Space Station just got extended to 2030 for its operations. And so that gives us time to start developing these CLDs. And that will also make sure that we have a sustained presence in LEO, that we don't have a gap, because NASA has not been good at avoiding a gap, right? We all know that after Apollo and after Shuttle. And so the fact that station got extended to 2030, it allows commercial industry time to design and develop these platforms so that they will be ready by the end of the decade. And this will ensure our leadership in LEO, US's leadership in LEO as well. So I wanted to throw this in here. I kind of already mentioned it, but I really thought this is a cool logo to show everybody too. But NASA just recently announced that We will be extending ISS operations to 2030. There's a really great report that is out there on the internet that the team put together outlining the entire plan for the extension and then the transition to commercial LEO destinations. And this piece of the puzzle for the vision is really important because, like I said, it allows us time between now and 2030 to develop these platforms and make sure that they're in place so that we don't have a gap in low Earth orbit. So how do we make this vision a reality? Here's our strategy on one page, our roadmap. And what I want to point out to you is that we have 2 phases to our strategy. And so right now we're in phase 1, which we're calling early design and maturation. And so in this particular phase, right now we have 4 different commercial LEO destinations and work. The first one that I'll talk about is Axiom. They are under contract right now. The contract's the commercial destinations on ISS. They'll be attaching an element to the front of the space station and then build up their platform while attached to the ISS, and then eventually will break off to be their own free flyer. So that was one part of the strategy. The second part is what we're calling commercial destinations for free flyers. These are the newest part of the portfolio. 3 different companies were awarded funded Space Act agreements in December of 2021. It was Blue Origin, Nanoracks, and Northrop Grumman. And so they've all had their kickoff meetings, and so they're off and running, creating their platforms. That takes us to about the 2025 timeframe. And then at that point, NASA will do a free and open competition for a FAR-based contract. And that'll take us into phase 2, which will be certification and services. So NASA will perform certification of the platforms that we select and then procure the services that we need for low Earth orbit. In that timeframe during phase 2, we'll also be working transition of activities from the ISS to these future CLDs. And you can see the list of the different activities that we'll be planning to transfer over to these CLDs. So that's the strategy in a nutshell in a couple minutes. So if you have questions, we'll be happy to field those once we're done here. And so this just takes me to my last slide, which is just a 1-pager of our portfolio. So you can see all these really cool platforms that are in work. I think it's a really exciting time that we have 4 different commercial destinations in work right now. There's a lot of exciting things happening in the industry. And so I'll pass it over to Tej. We'll kick off with Axiom to talk a little bit about their company and the platform that they're creating.
Hi, everyone. This is Tej, Production Officer at Space. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. So my name is Tej. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer from Axiom Space. Thank you for having us. Misty, thanks for being the MC. This is actually the 3rd panel that I'm doing that's almost exactly like this week. And the first one was with Phil on Monday. And it's an amazing time. The fact that we're having these panels is not, well, it is very exciting and interesting to all of us, but one of the panels that was on this week was not for a space community, it was for a venture capital community. And the MC was a venture capitalist. That was the one difference. And what amazed me about it is, I don't have a typical aerospace background. I joined Axiom about 8 months ago from Google, and I was a startup founder for most of my life before that. And the way I actually got into Axiom is I invested in the company 2 years ago. That was my way of, committing to myself that I want to be part of this movement. And even a year ago, I don't think I could have scripted sitting here with this panel from the outside world. And now the reason I mentioned these 3 panels is it's the perfect timing. Like, this is the time this is going to happen. Our first mission is going up in 9 days, AX-1, the first crewed civilian crew to go to the ISS. And it's historic. Obviously, it's historic for all of us, but if you look at humanity, if you look at human history, this is the first time this level of a public-private partnership has ever come together to make this kind of commercial step. I won't even say to develop an industry or market. I think it's way before that. I believe that this is the next chapter for us. And Misty introduced Axiom as a platform. And my thesis coming into Axiom at our first board meeting was what we're building here is a platform. These missions that are going up, we're calling them precursor missions. And there's a lot of talk about the cost of launch coming down. There's a lot of talk about how our stations will be much more cost effective than what it took for the ISS to go up. But my fundamental belief is we can't be thinking about cost. We have to be thinking about value. If we're talking about a mission costing, hundreds of millions and bringing it down to tens of millions, that's still not creating multiple trillion-dollar markets. For us to do that in a time period where our venture capitalists, myself included, need to see a return in the next decade, we need to be thinking about every mission going up, adding billions of enterprise value and creating a platform that allows several other companies and startups to take advantage of that fractionalized cost and build new businesses, new markets, new industries. So as we at Axiom put our modules up and grow out, fill that gap for the ISS, really where I'm thinking in terms of my mandate is working with governments, working with corporations, working with individuals, and working with institutions together at the same time to figure out what these huge opportunities are. And there isn't a day in my job in the last 8 months where I haven't walked out and said, I'm 100% confident that this is the first time in human history these conversations have happened. And I know this because when you get a government, a venture-backed company, and a customer, and usually an individual in a room together, they're speaking about things that weren't possible before. And even if those 4 people ever got together and spoke theoretically about these things, there was never a time where this was going to happen this year. So I think it's a really incredible time, and I'm very appreciative to be here. And I know I didn't speak too much about Axiom, but Misty, you gave it a great overview.
Thanks, Tej. Okay, let's go over to Sierra.
Well, good morning. My name's Steve Lindsey, Chief Strategy Officer for Sierra Space. Happy to be here this morning. So I'll talk to you a little bit about Sierra Space, first of all. So we're a company that we carved out of Sierra Nevada Corporation last June. And the reason we did that is specifically for what we're talking about today. We saw the opportunity. I first joined Sierra Nevada Corporation a little over 10 years ago, working my first job as a program director, program manager for Dream Chaser as we were developing our lifting body spacecraft. But even 10 years ago, when we were doing the design, we really focused on a design that could land anywhere in the world. And the reason we did that is we saw that at some point in the future, we would be commercializing low Earth orbit. However, at the time, I didn't know when and I didn't know how it was going to happen. But then if you watch what has happened over the years, launch costs coming down, the space station, probably retiring by about 2030 or so, and the opportunity came up. And so here we are 10 years later with this opportunity. The reason we carved out as Sierra Space back in June is we saw the opportunity, but we wanted to accelerate our products because when we think about commercial low Earth orbit, what we're thinking about really is an ecosystem. You need a destination and you need transportation. And with our company, we have both elements of that. And so the Dream Chaser crewed and cargo versions of the vehicle, plus our destination, creates an ecosystem that has worldwide access, the ability to land anywhere you can land a 737, provides that on a transportation standpoint. And obviously, if you have one or more destinations in low Earth orbit, then the sky's the limit, no pun intended, of what you can do up there. And so we carved out, created a separate company focusing on accelerating our products. And so you may have heard we made a large capital raise last year. We've again carved into a separate company, and as of January, besides working on our destination, we're also accelerating our crewed version of the Dream Chaser. We have a full program working on that right now. Obviously, the cargo version, we're in 24/7 production. We plan to fly our first commercial resupply services mission Q1 of next year up to the International Space Station. So we got the wings on, the testing's done, and it's really looking like a spacecraft now. And that's our number one priority. We're also working on a national security version of the Dream Chaser as well, and investing heavily in our station. So as part of the commercial free flyer program, we are team 50-50 with Blue Origin, along with several other key companies. And we're working on our first destination, which is called Orbital Reefs. So when I left NASA out of the astronaut office and went to SNC to work on the Dream Chaser, what I was really thinking 10 years ago was, how do we commercialize? When is it going to happen? I know it's going to happen and I want to be a part of it. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I didn't know when that was going to happen, but here we are 10 years later, and the opportunity is right now, this decade. And that's what makes this so exciting, because it's going to revolutionize how we do space, particularly in low Earth orbit. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. All right, we'll go over to Rick for Nanoracks.
Marshall.
Or Marshall for Nanoracks, sorry.
That's all right. Did we change jobs? No, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. You know, I think she said I spent a long career at NASA. I was there 37 years, worked on airplanes, Mars missions, spacecraft science, Earth science with Goddard Spaceflight Center, and eventually got into rockets. And so I've been watching the space industry grow. And you know, I got to the point where I just saw what was happening in the industry. As Steve pulled on a little bit, just saw what was happening in the industry. And I said, you know, I want to be out there. I want to go build something and make something that's fantastic. Nanoracks came along. Nanoracks has been out there, and I didn't realize this. What they were doing was working on payloads on ISS. They started that over a decade ago. They've been over 1,300 payloads already to ISS, with many more planned on the way. As well as over 30 different countries. And, you know, I always thought of Nanoracks as, oh, they're just the payload guys. They're doing little ISS things. What I didn't realize was their game plan all along was to move into space platforms, move into outpost, and to move into space station type systems. And now is the time. You know, what's been going on in the space industry has been absolutely unbelievable. And you know, for me, that made me really excited to leave, which was about 7 months ago now. To leave and go work on that. So, you know, when I look at this system, I look at the ecosystem that NASA has built by providing cargo capability, providing crew capability. ISS is going to retire. There's just no way it's going to run forever. And it's time to make sure we don't have that gap. So I see the systems that you see here as critical for continued presence in space, for continued U.S. presence in space as well as supporting international activities that we have going. One of the things that we're trying to do is we look at this as a system that we can launch all together in one single launch. That's our goal. We're not trying to build a vehicle that we just keep adding to, like we did the ISS, and eventually you get this giant system up there. Our goal is to build systems like this, maybe expand a few of them a little bit, but then build more systems and, you know, focus our approach to different markets as they need to be approached. Because, you know, maybe your research scientist doesn't want to be right next to a guy who's filming a movie who's banging around in the vehicle. So those types of things are, I think, really important. The other thing I'd say is, you know, I get this question all the time, so I'll just go ahead and address it. Do you really believe there's a commercial market out there? And, you know, when I walked out the door, I actually had a viewpoint that I think a lot of people have is, well, maybe there's a commercial market, maybe there's not, but it won't be for that many. You know, you see 4 platforms up here that we talk about. I think that is totally wrong. When I walked out the door and I saw the demand has actually been pent up because ISS only has so much capability. It only has so much crew time. It only has so many, you can only go up and down so many times because we only had, you know, the Russians at the time really able to take us up. This is all changing now. And to make it available to the whole world, not only just the US, but the whole world, really opens up that opportunity. So I just see a tremendously bright future for the commercial destinations market, also for all of our companies. Thanks.
Thanks, Marshall. All right, last but not least, we got Rick for Northrop.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our platform specifically. Northrop, we're utilizing our heritage vehicles and systems from our Cygnus spacecraft, from our Halo habitat, from our mission extension vehicle, as well as all the experience that comes with that in providing commercial services, such as the cargo and science delivery we do with the Cygnus vehicle. And with that, our goal is to deploy a technically low-risk station as soon as it's needed. We take a phased approach, but we design in multiple docking ports and other growth potential features to allow us to respond. As the commercial LEO market grows, we will grow with it. So stage one is the initial stage planned to deploy roughly 2028. That could come in a year plus or minus a year, again, depending on the needs and the demands. So in the Space Act agreement we have with NASA, we're working towards a preliminary design, among many other things, for the commercial station. But we're doing much more beyond the Space Act agreement with NASA. We're actually flying missions. We got our 17th Cygnus vehicle docked to the International Space Station right now. We have 2 mission extension vehicles in orbit with more coming. We're not just studying, we're building our habitat, our Halo habitat, which will launch into cislunar space here in 2 or 3 years. We operate on the International Space Station almost around the clock with our Cygnus vehicle. We work closely with NASA on the space station. And we're providing services. We're providing ground science facilities already as part of our Cygnus spacecraft. We're delivering science and cargo to the space station. We're doing trash removal. If you ever lived in a close quarter, don't underestimate the need for trash removal. We're reboosting the International Space Station, et cetera. So we are operating or building many of the pieces that we need for our commercial space station. We're continually improving the capabilities of our Cygnus spacecraft. We're making it bigger, better, adding capabilities to it on a regular basis. And because of all this effort that we've got building and integrating a commercial space station is a much smaller step for us. So we have a lot of the pieces in place already. So our big picture, our stage one, roughly 2028, it deploys as volume for up to 4 crew members. It has all the crew systems, keep them safe and comfortable. It supports internal and external payloads. And then we supplement that volume. Because it's early stage, we supplement that volume with 2 stretched Cygnus cargo vehicles attached to it, basically around the clock. But those are not just cargo vehicles. You know, Cygnus is like, think of a Cygnus spacecraft as like an empty room. We can outfit it. We could make it a closet and fill it full of cargo. We could make it a research facility, a science facility. We could make it a manufacturing facility. We could outfit the inside of the Cygnus in many ways. So those Cygnus spacecraft will be outfitted for not just cargo. There'll be science facilities and crew facilities installed in them as well. Stage 2, a year to 2 years later, comes up more than doubles the volume, greatly increases the science capability. And then we'll have up to 6 docking ports at that point where we'll continue to grow. You know, anybody who's ever operated the space station, docking ports are life. You need the visiting vehicles coming and going, and you need the growth potential, especially in a market where that is still being defined. So future stages, we could have inflatable, expandable modules for increased tourism, manufacturing modules, like I say, and so on. But again, as the market evolves, we'll evolve with it. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. Okay, so that wraps up kind of the descriptions of each of the companies and their platforms. I'm going to toss out a question to the panel just to kind of get things going, and then we'll start taking questions from the audience. So anybody could take this. You can raise your hand, whoever wants to go first. But first question here, could more money accelerate the completion of your commercial LEO destinations?
I'll take the first shot at it. So I would never turn down more money. So, but with that, you know, you already see our timelines are fast. I mean, it's 2022. We're talking about 27. Are those schedules aggressive? Well, I think everybody would say that schedules are aggressive, but if you don't, you know, aim high, you're not going to make it. You guarantee if you set your schedule further out, you will maybe not make that schedule. So we want to be aggressive. So our schedule's already aggressive. If you wanted to accelerate them, maybe that might happen, depends upon how much money. But I think what more money does do for you is allows you to take care of problems when they pop up, to take
Mhm.
care of issues, to allow additional testing, to allow additional paths to make
Buy down
sure
more
that if
risk.
something, buy down risk, all that other good stuff. So I think more money would definitely be helpful to ensure that we at least hold the schedules that we have, if not accelerate them slightly. That would be my take on that.
Yeah, what I would add to that, I think Marshall has it right. What I would be really paying attention to is that second phase in the money, in that second phase, to make sure that we get to something that's up and flying, or hopefully multiple up and flying before the ISS retires. I mean, right now it's, there's some challenges here, right? The NASA, has agreed to extend ISS to 2030, but we have major partners, I won't mention the name, who have only agreed to 2024. And so we have a risk of a gap that we have to really pay attention. And so, we're going, I know everybody up here we're going as fast as we can with the resources we have. But we really have to pay attention to that because we don't want a gap like we did with Crew back in the last decade.
Absolutely.
Like Marshall said, yes, more money would always help. And there are definite elements and risk mitigation that would actually accelerate the plan.
Mhm.
There's certain things that more money won't necessarily change the timeline. But the other part of it is this commercialization piece. And our pipeline of customers will definitely be there now, right? We have these 4 people going up in less than 2 weeks, and we have several missions planned moving forward. But I think, even getting it up earlier, I think one of the biggest unknowns here, the time is now, and we will figure it out this decade, is there a market? And I know Marshall mentioned pent-up demand in one of the earlier panels, the one that Phil, earlier panels I was on this week that Phil emceed, your colleague Adrian was on it. And we had a very healthy discussion about demand. And he used the same comment of there's pent up demand, and Voyager as a company that has several customers is seeing that they can do more. And what I pushed back on, and then Phil also mentioned pent up demand, that he's seen it. He's seen people that want to go, countries that want to go. And I just pushed back very hard on them is it pent up demand or is it pent up desire? Because those are two very different things. And when we're talking about a market, I don't want to constantly be the Google guy who came here who's yelling trillion, trillion, trillion. I feel like, I don't know if you guys have seen the Facebook movie, the Justin Timberlake character that says, what's cooler than a million? A billion. So I'm just trying to one up him and say a trillion, but I'm not just saying 1 trillion. I'm saying multiple trillions for all of us these 4 companies, right? For all of us to have $1 trillion market cap in this decade, maybe, is not impossible. If you look at the 5 largest companies by market cap in the world right now, 3 of them didn't exist 20 years ago, right? They all happened because of the internet and because of their platforms. Amazon, not because they sold books. Google, not because it did search. It's they figured out these hyper growth business platforms that enabled multiple companies to become huge enterprises. And the 2 other companies that did exist, which were Apple and Microsoft, they adapted as well. And they created these other platforms. So I really do believe that more money will also help us all build our platforms, not just technically, but to be prepared for the demand that will be coming.
Rick, do you have
I
an
can't
answer?
add to, these guys said it so well. Thank you.
All right. So are there any questions in the audience? I think is there a mic person running around? Okay.
We have a question from the online audience, and the question is, what are some potential options to bridge the time between the end of ISS and CLDs if one or more of the partners do not want to continue ISS beyond 2024? And this may have been already answered, and I apologize if so.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? There was kind of a lot in there.
What are some potential options to bridge the time between the end of ISS and CLDs if one or more of the partners do not want to continue ISS beyond 2024?
Oh, okay. Well, so right now, the plan is to extend to 2030. And that transition report that I mentioned all that was partnered with the other folks that are part of the International Space Station, right? We do have a list of things that we were looking at, we're calling transition indicators. So we are definitely not going to retire the space station until one of these platforms is ready. That's definitely like our number one indicator. And so as we get into phase 2, we'll have a better indication on the maturity of these designs and their readiness. And part of our plan also is trying to do an overlap between the platforms. So we're targeting to have CLDs come online in the 2028 timeframe, and then ISS in 2030. And so we're kind of using that as margin or buffer between the two different platforms to make sure that we don't have a gap.
Hi, thank you for this panel, really timely. So my question is about the risk posture on safety standards and regulatory processes. A lot of you come from NASA previously, and you know how we have to have certain manufacturing, et cetera, standards for space-ready products. How do we mitigate that? Not only thinking about the US market, but the future international market. We may have other players from other parts of the world. Thank you.
That's a great question. Something I actually worked at very hard when I was at NASA on the HLS program. I was kind of leading the charge on that. And one of the things that I really wanted to address is to make sure that when we walked into the HLS program, that the safety standards that we use for design and construction, that we use for health and medical, that we use for safety in general, we all understand are on the same page with the industry, and that they've all agreed to those standards up front, that this is how we're going to go build this, pre-negotiated right at the beginning. And that's exactly what we did on the HLS program. And then we're continue doing that. And that's something that has to happen here between our companies and NASA as well, is to leverage on that. I mean, you know, those standards are actually there for a reason, because somewhere along the way, somebody ran into something that said, holy cow, if we don't do this, you know, we could lose the vehicle. And we forget the lessons learned along the way. Those things have been around for 50 years sometimes, and people go, well, gee, do I have to keep doing this? And we need to ask ourselves, we need to continually ask ourselves those questions, because one, we need to understand where they came from and why they're there. And two, how do we adapt them to our situation today? And so that work has to happen. That's some of the work that all of us will be doing with NASA to make sure that we're doing things efficiently, cost effectively, but still maintaining their safety.
Right there.
Back there.
Two there.
Hello, really enjoying the discussion. I have two questions, and you can choose which one to answer or not answer at all. So the station utilization has evolved over 25 years. There's lots of multi-user facilities that are in station. So are you designing these commercial LEO destinations to a design reference mission for multidisciplinary science, or you're just putting standard interfaces that can be utilized by the by the science community to plug in their hardware? And then the second question is, what role does space tourism play in the business model?
So I'll take a shot at the first one. You know, we're probably all of us are in the same boat where we're in the initial design phase of their space stations. I think you got to look at the markets first and say, what is the commercial markets? You know, in this construct, NASA is going to be one of many customers, and we already know kind of what NASA is targeting for their requirements, and we're certainly going to design to those requirements. But as far as if you look at things like in space manufacturing or biopharma and things like that, what you really have to do is listen to the customers. What does the customer needs? Do they need pure microgravity, or do they need a vacuum? Do they need to be separate from people because of the microgravity disturbances that we occur in space station? How rapidly do you want to refly? One of the things that's a challenge on space station is if you're working a course of action, a payload or an experiment, You go through a long process to get manifested on board. You fly your thing, you come back. You may want to go right back up, but you can't do that. And so when we think about a commercial space station and you think about facilities, you have to really focus on the customer and the market and what the commercial market actually looks like. What is that? When you talk about pent-up demand, where is it and what do these companies want to do? The way we think about our platform is we're building a business platform in space. We're going to take care of the space portion of it. You tell us what you want your business to do, and we're going to design the facilities to see that you can accelerate your business.
I'll take the second part. You know, we don't use the word space tourism, space tourist for a couple of reasons. I do believe travel will be one of those multi-trillion-dollar markets that will evolve. Will it be in the next decade? I think so. But even at the prices right now for civilians to go up, for it to be a mass market, again, our platforms need to be creating so much enterprise value to subsidize the cost. And you know what I like to think of the 4 people who are going up in 9 days. Well, Michael Lopez Alegría is an astronaut, and it's not lost on me that I'm sitting on a panel with 2 astronauts. This is an example of something a year ago I wouldn't have been able to script. A year ago, I think I had met 2 astronauts, and I probably even wrote their names in a book because it was so exciting to me. And one of them I tricked to come speak at a conference at Google. So that's how I got her to come. But you know, in terms of the people who are going up, the first few people, I think of them as space explorers. The commitment these people have made over the last year and a half, financially, time-wise, and emotionally and energy-wise, history won't look back on them as tourists. History will look back on them as explorers. They're opening this next chapter for us. So does it play a role? Yes. Now, where I look at it is I'm not thinking of it as space tourism. I'm thinking about my customer segments. There's governments, there's corporations, there's individuals. And right now, in terms of demand, you're talking about a very finite market for all 3 of those. Fortune 100s, maybe a little more, you know, 30, 40 countries maybe, and then individuals at the price point that it's at, again, that same order of magnitude. And I think what we need to do for tourism to really be a major driver of this is evolve from exploration to travel. And that's when that market really expands. And I think that will be the tail end of when the platforms evolve.
I think there was another question. Yeah, right there.
Terrific discussion. One thing that is amazing about the space station is it's 27 nations forming an international partnership, and perhaps to what Tej just said, that partnership is kind of fixed by the infrastructure we have right now of how big it can be. I'm just curious, and I don't know if you guys can share this because it's a lot of this stuff is proprietary, but when you go out there and you pulse the market, how many other countries want to be up there, and how much does this program, this opportunity to expand beyond the ISS, bring in other nations around the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the International Space Station has been operating for over 20 years in some way. And it's a very specific way of doing business. There's a lot of folks probably know it's kind of a barter agreement between countries. Each country brings up pieces and they exchange fuel for seats, et cetera, et cetera. So now we have to figure out how to commercialize that. How does one of our companies deliver a space station to orbit, but then sell services to international customers? That is a big discussion. We're working with NASA. NASA knows it's a big question. Is it going to be direct from, for example, the European Space Agency to Northrop Grumman to buy services? Is it going to be through a third party like NASA or the government or a European country? That's a discussion that has yet to be resolved.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Rick, is that at NASA, we are starting to have those discussions with our international partners on what they foresee their needs are after ISS retires in 2030. And then like Rick said, there's a lot of different models that we can try to implement. as we transition to these commercial LEO destinations, and all that's in work right now. So we don't quite have that figured out yet, but maintaining those partnerships with other countries is very important to NASA and to the US, just from a soft power perspective, right? So it's very high on our priority list to try to figure that out, but it's definitely still in work.
Yeah, to summarize, the internationals are going to be involved in a big way. It's just a question of how that all works out. I think Tej wants to.
So, to answer your question, yes, there is demand and conversation to the level we can speak about. The two announced deals that we have are with Italy and Hungary, and there's more coming. And I think what you're going to see is those type of deals, or in my role, I consider them deals. Those partnerships are going to be much more aligned with when I talked about the public-private nature of this next chapter. Those models are going to come much more from the public side. So, I'll give you an example. Last time I was in DC, I was with two of my colleagues, both former NASA legends, and I was picking their brain on, I'm new to this world. First time I'm really having this level of business conversation with countries at like the cabinet level. It might be led by different ministries in different countries, but how do we negotiate? How do we do this? And it's much more effective to take the previous way of doing it, not quite barter, but that same mentality, and shifting it, not revolutionizing it, like small iterations on it. And I mentioned governments, corporates, and individuals. I never thought I'd be saying this, but it is a pleasure to work with governments and attorneys for governments in this world in comparison to working with corporations or individuals. Nothing wrong with corporations or individuals, but they've never worked in this space before, literally, pun intended, like they haven't. So it's all new. When you're working with a government, just simply like the budgeting cycles is just easier to understand than with a Fortune 100 company.
Any other questions in the room? I don't know where Mike is. Up there.
Hi, sorry. When we talk about Earth observations, two big benefits of the ISS are that it's a cheap bus for payloads, and that we can get our data down in seconds. So my two questions as far as the commercial low Earth orbit and potential hosted Earth science payloads would be, how do you anticipate these kind of fitting into the market compared to like CubeSats and small sats as far as renting the bus essentially, and what are you expecting for data downlinking? Is it TDRS or what kind of capabilities are all of you thinking about for that?
Absolutely. It's hard to tell in some of the graphics we've released. We're updating those, but there's going to be an external platform where Earth observation sensors and cameras and whatnot can be stationed out there. And so there's, like everything else, we're going to look at the market for it, but absolutely there is, we know there's a lot of users out there right now of the International Space Station. So we're going to try to make a place for them. As far as data, we don't have any specifics yet, but it has to be as good as TDRS. All right, you need to get that data down to the customers. You can't be waiting on ground stations, for example.
So to add on to that on the comm side, it's probably not going to be TDRS. We need big data down. We need big data up. Depending on what the customer needs in terms of what they're working on, whether it be science or research or manufacturing, they're going to want to be able to get the data down quickly, make decisions, and either change the course of action on whatever it is they're working on, or have it inform their processes on the ground very quickly. So when you think about the data requirements, they're going to be huge, and so whatever we build and develop has to have the capability to do that. Because again, this is about enabling businesses and companies to be successful on orbit. And they're going to need either rapid transportation of their stuff up and down, depending on what they're building, or rapid data, or probably a combination of both of those things.
I think I would add to that, I look at what we're doing and our job isn't to build, all these stations look different, but the goal is to get data, is to get the information, to learn something. And so that is really the most important thing to me. So data is going to be huge, huge, and being able to get it up and down. And how do you transmit that? How do you make sure that's happening? Teachers is fine, but I think Steve said it right. Big data up and down is going to be huge as we move forward. That's probably the biggest thing I would add to that.
I'll jump in on the data side as well. Like, you mentioned seconds, and you mentioned it's a, an effective way to get the science up there. We're going to have to, because I think that's where the market will be, but think in orders of magnitude much higher, right? Seconds. Imagine the internet doing a transaction right now and it took seconds, right? Like we got to get this into real time, and that data set is going to grow so big that even if we solve the bottleneck problem, we're going to have to be putting processing up there. And as we go beyond low Earth orbit, the types of latency and issues we're going to have, again, an entirely new technical like invention set that's coming out of it. So I think, on the data side, just thinking orders of magnitude, multiple orders of magnitude bigger than we are right now. And then on the business side, fractionalizing that cost. So it actually goes down to zero to free. And the model you can look at is at cloud computing. If you were starting a company, if you were a startup founder 20 years ago, you'd be spending millions building a server closet, probably in your office, getting racks. And then all of a sudden cloud computing comes out and you can pay by the second. And the market gets so competitive that now if you're a startup today and you're looking to build your app, the Googles and the Amazons of the world will give you hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit to build on their platform. So it went from costing millions to fractionalizing to free to them paying us to build our platforms. I think that's where we need to get to.
Great question. Anyone else in the room? There's one more back there.
Thank you for being here. I just have a kind of a fun question. I understand that the demand, I think I hear you say, is there for all the companies, but I'm kind of curious as far as the competition versus cooperation, meaning do you feel like this is the gold rush and you want to be the one that sets the standard, or are you looking for standardization, meaning are there any areas that you foresee of cooperation between you as competitors perhaps, but just kind of curious if you see a need or foresee a need for certain areas of cooperation that maybe you're already doing. Just curious about that.
Absolutely. There has to be some kind of collaboration and cooperation. I've reached out to all of these other companies over the past few months, and I don't know exactly how that's all going to work, but we need to work together. First of all, I don't know about these guys, but it's very important to me personally and to my company that the commercial space station happens, whether we're running it or whether we're a smaller part of it remains to be seen. But it's important for it to happen because we can't have that gap in LEO, as Steve said earlier. We cannot let that happen. But we have to work together. If there's multiple space stations up there, there has to be a way for whether they're in the same inclination. If they're not, then it's a little bit different story. But whether it's common docking systems or whether it's something else, common data transfer, et cetera, there has to be some kind of a level to that works amongst all of them.
You have a question? Oh, okay.
Yeah, thanks. One of Misty's first slides had a bullet about NASA wanting to have a national lab in the post-ISS era. They obviously aren't building their own platform at this stage, at least. So are you having conversations with them about that, about their use of your facilities in some manner?
Yeah.
What we would call national lab?
Yeah, so certainly NASA, as Steve said earlier, NASA gave us their desires in the announcement of what they want to do, what their goals and objectives are with respect to science and laboratory capabilities that have. Obviously, we're all responsive to those, as well as continuing to work with them in the future to make sure that we're meeting a customer. NASA is a customer, meeting their needs, along with our other folks that we're talking to internationally and in the commercial sector. So we have to balance that. We have to figure out what that balance is, because in the end, our goal is not to build a space station. Our goal is to provide services, to provide the capability that our customers need, because that's how you make money. And that these are commercial endeavors, and we're all trying to make some money at this.
You had a question?
You got one online? Go ahead. You know, Jeff.
We have a question from our online audience. What does LEO look like in 2040? And what other facilities and capabilities do you imagine to exist by then?
Apparently I'm the futurist today. So what does LEO look like in 2040? I think in 2040, LEO looks like maybe thousands of people living and working in low Earth orbit. And if you look at, and I'm including myself in our own company in this, and if you look at these platforms and you say, thousands of people living and working in orbit, is this the right solution? It's probably not. So what I think is going to happen in 2040, and we kind of alluded to this when we're looking at customer sets, there tends to be an assumption that we're building a commercial space station. In fact, you have 4 companies here, and if we're all successful, we'll have 4 different space stations up there, probably in different orbits. And then if you start thinking about the businesses that we're going to create that are going to use low Earth orbit, each of them are going to have different requirements, and you may end up with separate space stations. You may end up with an uncrewed space station to do certain things, a crewed space station to do certain things. You may end up with a hotel in space that will be separate with different types of activities. And so what I see in 2040 is a distributed system with multiple locations and destinations for people to go to, and a lot more transportation options than we have today that are capable of carrying a lot more people.
All right. We have one back there for the audience. I'll save mine until nobody else has it.
Good presentation. Oh, sorry, really loud. Is there any plans for intra-space station travel right now? Or is it just going off the basic platforms for the spacecrafts we have already? So if there's certain teams that are on one spacecraft that would be needed for another one, is there anything that they're working on towards building that connection?
So, well, I'll take a shot at that. First of all, whether we do transfer between space stations will depend on whether or not those space stations are in the same orbital plane and inclination. So like if we were all in, for example, 51.6 in plane with the ISS, then there would be the potential to be able to shift things and modules and people and cargo and things like that back and forth. I don't think that's been determined. I will say that to the point about having standards like for docking and things like that, I can speak from ours, and I think everybody else say the same thing, is we're not saying that our transportation system is the only system that can be used on our space station. We're welcome for anybody. Boeing's on our team. They're going to bring a CST-100 to our station, but anybody else, if a Cygnus, if Northrop wants to come up with a Cygnus and they want to have some businesses they want to create on our orbital reef, we're open to that. So we want to make sure that all of these platforms are open to anybody that wants to come deliver a module, lease a module, provide transportation, or whatever it is they want to do. So I think it's really important that we have an open architecture along those lines to enable, if not direct station-to-station transfer, and ability for all of us to take advantage of all of the infrastructure that's up there in low Earth orbit in the future.
Thanks, Steve. I think there's one more.
Yeah, I noticed orbital reef shows an altitude, and you just sort of talked about travel between stations. Do you all have a vision for what altitude and deconfliction with large LEO constellations? What's your sort of vision for what needs to happen there?
So altitude, we haven't, we may have something on a chart that talks about altitude. It does. I don't think we've really determined the altitude. Altitude is really going to be driven by the capability of the visiting vehicles. It's, honestly, it's all about logistics, right? Getting the cargo up there, getting the science up there to support the crew, getting the crew up there. Also, with a single destination, if you have your crew on board, the higher you go, the bigger the threat to the radiation environment. And so all of those things are going to drive. The inclination will drive how much payload you can get up there. The higher your incline, the less payload you can get there because of physics. And so I don't think we have concluded all of that yet. I don't know if anybody else. Yes.
I'll add to that. You know, the other part is MMOD. There are certain, as you know, the Russians recently created more mess up there. There's a lot of altitudes that aren't very good to be at. So, you know, we're not just going to go randomly pick altitudes. When we look at crew safety, we want to look at vehicle safety. Yeah. We want to look at logistics. What's the visiting vehicle capability? What are the abort options from those altitudes? So picking orbital inclinations as well as altitudes are going to be trades that we're actually working on over the next 6 months to a year as we go down that path. So we're not set on anything. I will say this: the ISS is actually in a pretty good orbital debris altitude. It's pretty high inclination. We lose a lot of performance in taking logistics back and forth, but that was set for other reasons. Is why we went to 51.6. So there may be other orbit planes that might be more advantageous to us commercially, while still providing benefits that we want to cross over certain parts of the earth that we're interested in. So you know, it's all in the trade space for us, and I'm sure the other fellows as well, other teams as well.
I have a question for Marshall. Marshall, you're not the youngest, the latest addition to the
Definitely
group.
not the youngest.
Yeah, not the youngest. You came from NASA looking over a lot of different things. And this is reflecting some of the things Sandy Magnus said yesterday. At what point are we going to get to where we break the bounds of proprietary data and share information across operations so that we can prevent accidents before we have an accident and then are forced to create those breaks in the proprietary data?
That's a good question. I mean, you know, obviously that would be the goal, right? You want to make sure that we're sharing information as much as possible. And, you know, I think the question was asked earlier about, you know, working together and things like that, that Rick addressed. You know, the space community and the space manufacturing, we're a small community. You know, we all know each other very well. We work with each other. We trust each other. Obviously, to that end, as we continue to develop these, you'll see us working together more and more. We want to be able to leverage each other's capabilities, which means if we're doing that we're then communicating with each other and we're talking about how do we do operations on say, Axiom system or orbital reef. How do we do operations on our system, the Star Lab, or Northrop's, you know? And so I think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be a particular inflection point. I think it's going to be driven by our needs and how do we work together and how do we make a system that works for our customers' needs. And that's what's going to drive those kinds of capabilities to happen.
Let me add something. We're actually working on that right now. I'm a member of ComStack, Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee, which is for the FAA AST. And one of the things we've actually been working on, I'm on the safety committee, is, you know, in airplanes, in the airline industry, you have this mandatory reporting system when there's an accident or an incident or mishap. That they've all bought into. A little different because they all fly similar airplanes provided by, you know, one or two providers. I think we'll eventually get to the same thing here. We're actually talking about doing a voluntary system right now that most industry, quite frankly, has already bought into. Because there's not that many players and we're in the infancy, I don't see us going to a mandatory system yet, but I think you will see that in the future.
I'd like to add to that and to the question about collaboration and competition. And I think you also talked about standardization. So I think standardization is a must. Like in every major new industry goes through this. Like if you recall, cell phones, there was a while when you couldn't actually text another carrier. Or if you went to another country, your phone wouldn't work. Like, you know, we can't have those type of issues with this. And in terms of competition and collaboration, as I mentioned, this is day zero. And it's because of NASA. The strategy is brilliant. And you've got 4 stations here, and we're all private businesses driven to, create more value and make money, but it's really creating that value. And if you look at what we're all here for, it's for space exploration. So at least everyone I've spoken to has a kind of grow the pie mentality. This pie is way bigger than we can imagine. We don't even know what that pie is yet. So if we're competing and not sharing information, we're not really helping anyone. Or we're thinking we're being too short-sighted. And I think what ends up happening for all of us right now is we're just laying the groundwork. We're building that infrastructure for what's to come. And then there will be competition. There are things where we're bidding against each other. But really the whole strategy here is to enable that commercialization. And that commercialization is not, a bit is not flipped. It's not like all of a sudden NASA decided it's commercial. To Marshall's point, this is not an inflection point. This is the beginning of a very long journey. And really, like I said, this is day zero, and it is happening.
Okay, well, with that, we are near the end of our time for our panel. So I just wanted to thank each of the guys for coming out today and sharing all their information with us. And I'll give you a round of applause. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your conference today.
Excellent. All right. Yes. Thank you very much, Misty. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. So